Good evening all. I'm Kevin Noble, Programme Secretary for HAGAS. Thank you for coming along tonight. I'm very pleased to introduce Logan Carpenter for tonight's HAGAS talk. Logan is an amateur astrophotographer and YouTuber, Logan's Astro, living in Auckland, New Zealand. By day, a pathologist looking down a microscope. At night, when the weather allows, he enjoys imaging the amazing objects in our universe through his telescopes. Logan has been interested in astronomy since the 1980s, viewing the moon, planets and with his father's Meade 8-inch SCT and trying out a bit of very basic planetary photography with an Olympus OM1 camera. It wasn't until February 2019 that he purchased his own 10-inch Meade SCT and soon discovered a passion for astrophotography, amazed by the wondrous objects in the night sky that could be imaged from his very own backyard. In many ways, it is like time travelling thousands and millions of light years into the past. Tonight, Logan will talk about imaging in the Southern Hemisphere and also about what tools he uses in PixInsight and Photoshop when processing images. And I mentioned time travelling, so I would like to point out that Logan is talking to us from the future. Thursday, the 23rd of April, 7 AM. So many thanks for joining us at that early hour, Logan. And from the future, please welcome Logan Carpenter.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for asking me to speak. This makes a change, somebody voluntarily asking me to earbash them about astrophotography. Normally it's my wife warning people not to ask me about the hobby, otherwise I won't stop talking about it. So look, I'm down here in New Zealand, the other end of the earth from where you all are. My name obviously, and as is already mentioned, pathologist. I'm actually mostly retired. I say mostly. I tried to retire in 2023, but the hospital sort of dragged me back to do some remote work, and so I've been doing that for the last 3 years. And as Kevin mentioned, I started astrophotography in 2019. And can I just check? Can you see my pointer? Yep. And
yeah, we see it fine.
Okay, thanks. And although this is not the actual 8-inch Meade, because I've actually the fork mount and everything has gone to somebody else. This is basically the telescope that my father got back when I was about 20 or so, and that was the first taste of looking up at the sky and a little bit of astrophotography just with the OM1. Very, very basic. Didn't really know how to polar align or anything like that. It did have a motor that tracked the night sky, but you know, it was really just a little bit of planetary stuff, which didn't look that great, but you could still see the rings of Saturn. So, and then I sort of used it a bit for visual, and then it dropped by the wayside for quite a few years until 2019 when I decided to get back into it and got the Meade 10-inch. Some of you are probably wondering why there is a picture of a frog up here with eggs up here. This is sort of related to the initial conversation I had with Kevin. He sent me a message on Astrobin, and I was actually just doing the crossword, I think having a coffee with my wife, and my phone showed this message popped up, and I thought, oh okay, I'll look at that later, and carried on with the crossword. And then later on got another message later in the day from Kevin saying, I'm a bit confused about your reply. And I was thinking, I haven't replied. What do you mean? Until I actually went and looked at the conversation, and here is Kevin's nice, message to me. And there's another one down here saying, what's up with the reply? And then I saw this down here, frog spawn, which majorly confused me because I was like, what on earth is that doing there? And I haven't even replied to this message yet. And then it dawned on me later during the crossword, one of the clues I was looking up was the answer was at frog spawn, and inadvertently I think I'd typed it into Astrobin reply, hit it, and didn't get a response. I tried again in Google, and then it came up, but I didn't realise that had gone through. So yeah, it's not a Kiwi way of insulting somebody. So just me being silly. Not realizing using the phone, the dangers of sending messages and not checking where you're sending them. So I'm here in New Zealand, and I'm up here in Auckland, which is the skinniest part of the country, and that has its problems. Now, the um, New Zealand is the Maori term is Aotearoa, and I wish it was land of the clear skies. Unfortunately, it's quite the opposite, and it's not ideal for astrophotography. It actually does translate to land of the long white cloud, which is not what you want when you're doing astrophotography. And that was the thing is it was seen with clouds hanging over here, which is a very common thing, unfortunately. It would be lovely to have the clear skies of Spain, for example, or something like that. But yeah, clear skies, and particularly full night clear skies, are very far and few between. So this is just an example showing how New Zealand is often with clouds, and then as soon as you get off the coast, nice and clear. Um, Now, the problems with being located in Auckland is I'm on an isthmus, so it's the skinny part. It means we've got no mountains to block clouds, etc. You can see the Southern Alps here down the South Island. The clouds come up here, and then over here it's nice and clear. We don't have any of that, so the weather just rips through here. We get a lot of wind as a result, not as much wind as Wellington through the strait, but a lot of wind through here, and not many clear nights. And unfortunately, when you see the weather forecast and they're sort of saying, oh, it'll be cloudy on the east coast, well, we're the east coast, and cloudy on the west coast. We're the west coast as well, so we get the worst of both worlds often. It's not as windy as Wellington. This is actually their sign for Wellington. They wanted to call it Wellywood, but Hollywood wouldn't let them. So they put out a thing for the community to say what would be the sign, and somebody decided that they would have the T, the O, and the N blowing away in the wind. This was just changed for the Women's World Cup. But yeah, that's the windiest capital of New Zealand. So we don't have that, fortunately. We've got a lot of dark sky areas, which is great. And you can see here that the certified places, dark skies, I think there's about 9 of them. And then there's quite a few that are aspiring places to become dark sky locations. So that's really good. People are becoming more and more aware of, the skies in New Zealand. Unfortunately, LED lights have done nothing to help that because everybody's now found that cheaply they can shine lights all over the place. But there is still a lot of awareness for dark skies, so that's really good. Now, as I said, weather not so good. We had Cyclone Vaianu come through. We do have a cyclone season here. It's from October to April, so we're just coming out of cyclone season now. The cyclones start up in the tropics, but because of this thing called the Coriolis effect, which I learned about more recently, related to the rotation of the Earth, the cyclones then like to come down and pass right through New Zealand. We don't get that many, but we had 2 or maybe 3 this year. And so this one was supposed to make landfall right here, and I was quite worried about my observatory, but it just went out to the side and didn't cause as much trouble for us here, but it did for other parts of the country. So, what are the challenges of imaging down here? Well, we don't get many clear nights, and I think in the UK you probably suffer from similar problem. A lot of the astro equipment has to be bought from overseas, and that is also an issue. We can't. We have a place here in Auckland that does sell astrophotography gear. It's actually through the Astronomy Society. Actually, they decided to create a sort of a way of buying equipment from them, but it is relatively restricted to QHY stuff. And so if you want to get ZWO stuff or anything like that, you can't. So you've got to buy it from overseas. And our New Zealand dollar is not worth a lot. You can see here about 50.5 of a euro, 0.44 British pounds, and 58 US cents. So whenever we're going to buy anything, we have to virtually double the cost, which makes it expensive. And then they hammer you with import duties, which I'm sure you probably suffer with as well. But there's no real local dealers if gear needs repair, so it's all got to go overseas. I've actually just had a perfect storm of disasters. The first one is up here. This is my ASCAR SQA 70, which when I first got it, I had a few problems with tilt, and then I seemed to have corrected it, but then it came back again, and it seemed to be wandering tilt. And what I noticed over time was this little piece of tape started extruding itself from underneath here. And I learnt, I didn't realize, but in making telescopes, they often use a stuff called Teflon tape. I think it's to help everything sort of move smoothly. But this was ejecting itself. So every time I focused out, it would pull some tape out, and then when the focus went back in again, it would not push it back in. And over time, it just came out until it eventually fell out, and I couldn't use this anymore. I contacted ASCAR, and I thought I was going to have to send the whole telescope away. They actually sent me back the whole back focusing part as a replacement and under warranty, and I've undone it and pulled that out, and it seems to be fine. I haven't imaged with it yet, but I've put it in. I did find another piece of tape floating around in there, so whether somebody was a bit lax when they were assembling it, I'm not sure. The other problem I had was one of my ASI cameras, my 2600. I was imaging with it one night, and then the next night when I went to image, the guide camera and the filter wheel weren't working, and I thought this is really odd. Couldn't get them to work, couldn't get them to be recognized. I was actually imaging away up at this other place I imaged called Langs Beach, and went back home. I took that all off. I put on my TubeTech filter wheel and TubeTech guide camera and used a little mini PC, imaged okay, and then went back up to my northern location, set it all up again, and suddenly I lost contact with my TubeTech filter wheel, which was only a week old. And in retrospect, I realized that what had happened is, though the accessories, whenever they stopped working, they were plugged into the USB hubs of the ASI camera, and that everything else functioned if it wasn't connected to there. So I managed to get myself, I don't know if I'll show up on the screen, but one of these little devices here. It's this down here, which you can plug into USB ports and see what happens, what power's going through. And it turned out my ASI 2600, although it was functioning initially for quite a few nights and eventually packed up, during this time it started outputting 10 volts instead of 5 volts out through the USB port. And basically anything I plugged into it, it bricked it and killed it. So currently I'm not plugging anything into the USB hubs of my cameras. And my TubeTech were actually really good. I told them that, this is what happened. So there it was the ASI camera's fault. But they sent a courier here. They picked up the filter wheel, they repaired it, and they sent it back to me, no charge. My ASI, I've got to send my 2600 is currently in China, along with my filter wheel and my guide camera. I think it's just arrived there. As far as I know, I am going to have to pay for the repairs for that because they're out of warranty. But yes, there are a few dangers there. So I'm a little bit hesitant to use the USB ports on my cameras at this stage. I'm hoping this is just a one-off and nobody else will experience it. But yeah, it was disturbing to lose all that equipment in one hit. Now, where I am in Auckland, I'm right next to Auckland City. So you can see the light pollution scale. I'm on a Bortle 6.1, it says, very specific. That has obviously increased over the years a bit. So that does mean that if I'm looking to the south, and this is out sort of towards the South Celestial Pole, big light dome, huge light dome from here. So I don't really image anything towards the South Celestial Pole here. It's just too bright and certainly not dark nebulae. It's probably, if I'm pointing this direction, more of a Bortle 7 or more. If I'm pointing the other direction, it's probably more of a 5.5, but that is a difficulty of being right next to a bright, the biggest city in New Zealand. Now, we do have a little batch up here at a place called Langs Beach, and so it's about an hour and a half's drive. And up here, it's quite a different Bortle scale. And I take my smaller portable rigs up there to image, and just the skies up there are crazy compared to down at home. So up here, we do have Whangarei up here. We've got Mangawai, which is rapidly growing, but we're in Langs Beach, and there's a sort of a gorge over here. So we're currently 3.5, it says, which is quite different. Increasing, again, as more and more development goes on, but still amazing night skies, which makes a huge difference, particularly if you're doing dark nebulae. This is Langs Beach, beautiful little place. Fortunately, my wife, before I met her, had the foresight to, with her family, buy a little bit of property about 35 years or so ago. Otherwise, we'd never be able to be here. But and then 14 years ago, we built a batch, and so we try and get up there as much as possible. And it has its own little micro environment as far as the weather is concerned. So it'll be all cloudy over at Whangarei and other areas, and often it's clear above us. So it's a great place to image. And this is just an example. I just got a North Sky camera with my two portable rigs here. This is the batch here, badly needs a paint. And I'm just setting up here, and you'll see if if the video is playing, I'm hoping, you can see how the Milky Way is quite clear in the Milky Way core. And we do get the Milky Way come overhead here. Even when the moon comes up, which you'll see, it wasn't a full moon, but even with the moon coming up, you can still see a lot of the night sky there. So yes, a lot better compared to at home. And this is just a shot that I've taken. I'm not great at Milky Way photography. I'm just sort of learning that a little bit, but this is a shot just off the balcony, looking across out to the hen and chickens, and this is the Milky Way coming up here, Roafuci over here. I think that's Carina there somewhere. It's hard to tell because I don't have one of those cameras that has been modified to allow you to pick up all the HA. And this is just another shot with my telescope imaging, and you can see the Milky Way through here. Now, but advantages of the Southern Hemisphere, well, I'd say the Southern Sky targets, but having said that, I think we're all jealous of each other's targets. I'm jealous of the Northern Hemisphere targets, so that kind of cancels itself out. One advantage I think we have is the Magellanic Clouds, those two dwarf galaxies that actually give us the opportunity to image them actually as well as we can image nebulae in our own galaxy. And this is actually just a shot I did more recently, and this is in the Large Magellanic Cloud. This is the Tarantula Nebula, and there are lots of areas of nebulosity you can image with a higher powered telescope. So I've imaged it with my smaller ones and also with the Meade 10-inch, where you can zoom in on certain areas. We don't have a galaxy season. There are areas in I suppose during the year where perhaps, early on in the evening, there's not the opportunity to image a nebula, but there is always something, because you can see the LMC here, it never goes below the horizon. So the small and large Magellanic Cloud are always up. Admittedly, down here, you wouldn't want to sort of image them because they'd be a bit low, but there is always something usually to image during the year. So that's an advantage. And the other thing is, particularly for people who do Milky Way photography, we have the Milky Way core visible from February to October. So there's lots of opportunity to do Milky Way astrophotography and do those lovely Milky Way arches, etc. This is just a shot showing, a shot from the batch. This is the roof of the batch. And this is the Southern Cross here, the cold sack. The Carina is actually showing up a little bit there, even though it's not a modified camera. But this is just showing the Large Magellanic Cloud, how big it actually is. I can't actually see it visibly at home in Auckland, but up at Langs Beach, it's quite obvious. And so it's quite a decent sized large object. Unfortunately, the small Magellanic Cloud was off the field of view. And this was just a shot, a horrendous Milky Way shot. I was just starting how to do it, but down from Lake Wanaka, there's Carina there, but you can see the Large Magellanic Cloud. It's quite large in the sky. It was just fortunate I had no idea the aurora was going at the time. Didn't know, so that was just a fortunate capture at the time down in the South Island. Now, interestingly, with the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds, I was always under the impression that they were satellite galaxies of our Milky Way. And there's all these dwarf galaxies which are satellites. But I think that's changed now from NASA, information out of NASA, I think it was in 2007, they were looking at the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds, and they were particularly looking at the halo around the LMC. And the halo, when they looked at it, the galaxies have halos around them, and they noticed it was a bit small. And when they sort of looked at quasars in the distance through towards the sort of the back of the LMC, they noticed there was this big stream of material that was being stripped away from the halo of the LMC, and it was to do with the interactions with the halo of the Milky Way. And what they've actually realized, well, they also noticed that actually these were moving too fast to be satellite galaxies. So they actually think that these are galaxies that just happen to be passing by. us at the moment not actually going around. And so it's a very fortunate time that at this now that we can get to image these things because they happen to be so close and just going past. So I think that's quite cool and something that we can do from the Southern Hemisphere, and we can image and study these nebulae in another galaxy, as well as we can image nebulae in our own galaxy. So that's quite, I like the idea of that. So look, this is my observatory at home. It's a little overbuilt. It is in our front yard, and we did want to make sure that it's the first thing you see when you come into the property. So we wanted it to not look too crappy and also to fit in with the house. So it sort of looks somewhat similar. If I was doing this again, I'd do it differently. So any of those who are building observatories, depending on what you're planning to do, but I have this whole area here as a dry room where my plan wasn't. I was originally sitting in here and watching the weather because the weather changes so rapidly. I sort of refer to us as having 5 seasons in one day: autumn, summer, spring, winter, and one that can't be identified. And so it changes rapidly. So you've kind of got to be getting the roof on and off and on and off. So I used to sit there. But now, of course, I've done a lot more automation. I actually sit in the room that I am here now, which is inside the house. It's nice and warm in winter, and run the whole thing. And if I was thinking about now, I would actually have just had the whole thing space for telescope and would have tried to put at least a couple of pairs in there. But it is what it is. So I've tried to make the most of that by I've got a roll-off roof here, which I think you said Glenn Clowder has spoken at your meeting. So I'm sure he's talked about this because I was actually setting this up around the time when he and Joe Navarro were sorting out the little Arduino to make it run through Nina, etc. So this is just a sliding gate motor stuck on the side of the wall. In here is my little Arduino setup, which communicates with Nina, so that Nina, I can open and close the roof through Nina and through the sequencer, and also I can just manually control it as well if I want to. This is what it looks like with the motor here, and I have a beam running right through the middle of the roof, and this is just the track that the gates use to slide open and close. And I'm not sure if I hope the video will run, but that's basically just what it's doing if it's running smoothly. So it just runs along and pushes that track along. There's a magnet here and a magnet in here, and when it gets to there, it knows that it's open, and then there's a magnet at the other end of the track, and when it gets to there, it knows that it's closed and it stops. And then I've got another little couple of magnet sensors here which talk with Nina to tell Nina when the roof is open and closed. The other thing that I did was, because I had only one pair and it was put in the center, I had these 2 telescopes first, and they're quite big and they're quite heavy. I think this one, the Skywatcher, is about 15 kilos all up with everything attached, and this one is a bit more. And getting a bit older and moving them on and off all the time was becoming a bit of a pain and a bit of a struggle. So I ended up doing a twin setup, and here I am looking very pleased with myself having finally finished it. It took a little while, and I had to get my wife to help me sort of holding on to things as I was lifting things on and off, so the whole thing didn't sort of tilt over a bit. But these are on here now. My plan had been to image with both at the same time, but because I have different focuses here, they run at different rates. And so although you can sort of coordinate things through Nina, there ended up being a lot of downtime, while this one would focus a lot quicker than this over here, the Osato. And so often these would get well out of sync. So what I actually do is I'll image either one night, I can image with this one, and then I can easily just tell Nina, now I'm imaging with this one. Or you can actually do it during the night, because you can actually set up 2 instances of Nina at the same time, have everything cooled down. And you might until midnight say, okay, this telescope is going to control the guiding and the mount. And then you just quickly switch over and say, okay, for the rest of the night, I want it to do this one. So that has been working really well. And of course, I've got the Cloud Watcher up on here, which is now helping me get a bit more sleep, because it means I can let that open and close the roof as the clouds come over. It's got a little sensor, reads the sky temperature, and as it sees a warming of the sky temperature, that's an indication of clouds coming over. And you kind of set up the limits, and it will close the roof, and when it clears again, it'll open it. And it means I don't have to stay up all night. This is one of my other smaller telescopes. This is the ASCAR 65 PHQ, and that has got a 2600 on the back, 2-inch filters here. And I'm using this, I've got into the strain wave mounts now. And so this is the Optron one, and this is working really well. And this is my other one, which was the SQA70 that I talked about. This is before it spat out its tape. And this was running. You'll notice that actually there's an ASI here, but I've got a ToopTech filter wheel on camera. I was actually running this off a mini PC, and I was just using the ASI Air as power distribution. I've kind of started to move away from the ASI Air a bit because I tend to find that I'm getting connection problems where it's dropping the connection all the time. So I'm sort of gravitating back towards using mini PCs. And when I'm up there at Lang's, I use the little pocket cloud watcher, and that you just sit on the deck, and it looks at the sky and it connects with your phone. And if clouds come over, it'll send a little warning to your phone and make a noise and wake you up, and then you can go running outside and either bring things in or cover them up or whatever. So that's another little useful device as a portable thing. Now, so about halfway through now, I think. So I thought I would get on to the second half, which is about what I do for processing. Processing, and what you produce in your images is very individual. So this is by no means sort of telling you how you should process. It's just how I process and how I like to produce my images. But there's a vast variety of how you want to have your final outcomes. Some people look at my images and probably think, oh, don't like those. So it's really up to the individual. And, let's face it, we're doing this hobby largely for ourselves. So we need to make sure that we're processing them and producing something that we're happy with and proud of. Now, I started off using, sorry, the mouse is a little sensitive, so it jumps a bit forward. I started off with PixInsight, looking at lots and lots of YouTube videos and trying to learn it, because it's not what you'd call the most intuitive program, and it is quite a steep learning curve. And I didn't know too much about Photoshop, so I was pretty much doing it all in PixInsight. But over time, I've learned from other people some things to do in Photoshop, and there are some things I find easier in Photoshop to do, particularly masks, than in PixInsight. So I now do a combination of the two, and I'm actually constantly moving my image from one to the other as I'm doing different things. So I'll show you some of the tools. I mean, I can't really go through and demonstrate processing image, because I find that if I process an image, it takes me hours and hours and hours, and you certainly don't want to see that. So I'll show you some of the tools that I use. When I get my images first, I just blink all the images in PixInsight. And what I do is I go through looking at them very quickly to see any bright satellite trails, any planes flying through, any clouds, and I sort of get rid of those. I don't use things like the subframe selector and all that kind of thing, looking at, exact shape of the stars and things through PixInsight. I did used to do that through the Deep Sky Collective because that's what they wanted, but I actually just then zoom in and look at the stars with my eyes and go, okay, are these really elongated? Have I gone out of focus a bit before it refocused? And I just chuck all of those and just keep as best as I can. I'm more forgiving now that we have Blur Exterminator on a little bit of elongation of the stars, but I don't want to have too much, because if the stars are elongated, then chances are you're sort of blurring the details in the nebula. So, but you can be a bit more forgiving now that we have that Blur Exterminator tool. What I do mostly is stack my frames in the weighted batch pre-processing. I have to remember how to say that, in PixInsight. Occasionally I'll use AstroPixel Processor, and AstroPixel Processor, a completely different program, but that actually has a really nice, easy way of doing mosaics, much more straightforward than PixInsight. I've done them through both, and they both give great results. But so stacking mostly in PixInsight. Gradient, removing the gradient. There are lots of tools actually to use, and there's other tools like Graxpert, which you can use. I've found that can be a bit aggressive at times. DBE is the most common one that we use, the dynamic background extraction, and I used to use that a lot. I've got a bit lazy now, so I use the gradient removal tool because it's a sort of run a one-click option. It does a pretty good job. If it doesn't do a good job, I might try and do DBE, but for most of the processing, I find it works really well. And then I'll run Blur Exterminator on my individual stacked filters. So I'm sort of more talking about doing SHO at the moment, my monochrome. And what I'll do is I'll run through and I'll do Blur Exterminator with correct only ticked, and that will just sort of round up any slightly elongated stars, and then sort of hit the restore to default settings button there and just run it on defaults, and then let it do the deconvolution. And it does a fantastic job. I mean, I can't fault Blur Exterminator at all. And the tools that Russell Croman's made are just amazing, and I think revolutionized how we process our images. So, having said that, there are a couple of things I think you have to be a little bit careful about, excuse me, which I'm going to demonstrate now. So, Blur Exterminate, I don't have an issue with. It works great. The next thing I will do is Star Exterminator and remove the stars. Now, this is one I did of the Veil Nebula. It was actually when I was able to use the rig in Spain, which I don't use anymore, but I did rent that for a couple of years. And when you look at this and it's an HA and you remove the stars, you look at it and you go, well, this is great. Nothing wrong here. I've done a great job. All the stars have been removed. It's got a nice clean background. I'll go ahead and image it. But I discovered when I did an image down here on a nebula called the Mermaid Nebula that you have to be very careful when it comes to fine filament detail, because Star Exterminator unfortunately has a habit of removing it. And I'll show you here. So this was actually done with Star Exterminator, and this is actually with StarNet 2. And at first look, it doesn't look like there's any difference, but when you do have a look, if you see here, you can see the filament comes down here and it kind of disappears. But if you look over here, there is the filament. And I'll just zoom in a bit closer on some other areas. One of the problems with StarNet 2 is that you end up with this very blotchy background that doesn't 100% remove all the stars necessarily. It can leave some behind. Star Exterminator leaves you with a beautifully clean background, which is really nice. And it does remove all the stars and very cleverly leaves the galaxies behind. So that's quite impressive that it can do that. But the problem is it can take out some of the detail in your nebulosity. So you can see here in StarNet 2, nice filament here, and here it's removed it in Star Exterminator. Up here you've got all this nice filament, but here it's been removed. So you do have to be a bit careful. Unfortunately, the difficulty is that you've got a nice clean background here and you've got this blotchiness. So you could go, well, I'm going to go for StarNet here, but now you've got to clean up the background, which is a bit of a pain to deal with. This is just looking in those areas again. You can see the nice filament here, but the corresponding area is missing. Same with here and here. And just another area here quickly where you can see still some stuff that would show up quite nicely if you processed it, but here it's like a ghost. It's almost completely disappeared. So what I actually do is on these situations, I'll actually do a starless version using both StarNet and Star Exterminator. And then I'll take them into Photoshop once I've stretched them and created 16-bit TIFF files. And I'll put StarNet down here. I duplicate the background. I don't know, it was just something I saw when people were talking about doing it. So I'll put the StarNet version in here, duplicate it, and then I'll start a new layer and I'll put in my version of Star Exterminator on the top. Put a mask in here. There's this little thing you push down here. Square will produce a mask, a layer, and then you can click your brush tool here, and then you put this on, so it's just getting off the screen onto black. And then you can blink but sort of between them, turning this on and off, and seeing where the areas are missing, and then just use the brush tool to brush them in. So I've actually got it here. I hope it runs, but you'll see my mouse moving. So I'm turning that on, and so you can see that it's got StarNet, it's got all the filaments. And then if I turn on the Star Exterminator version, they've disappeared. So if I blink backwards and forwards, I can see which areas I need to sort of paint over with the brush. So I have the brush tool there on black, bring that back on again, and then just brush down over there like that. And then you can see all the filament now suddenly comes through the mask. And the nice thing is here that I can get all the filamentous detail of the StarNet version, but the nice clean background of Star Exterminator. So just something to be aware of if you're doing processing of images that have this nice detail, because it will be removed quite often by Star Exterminator. And in something like the Mermaid Nebula which I was doing, it was quite a lot of it was being removed away. Stretching my images. Now, I've got crosses here, not to say that they're bad or anything, it's just I don't use them. Screen transfer function is often very harsh. People often talk about that. I have used it at times, and sometimes it does work quite well. And I have just used the histogram transformation to stretch my images. The generalized hyperbolic stretch, a lot of people love doing that and are very good at doing it. I'm absolute crap at it, and I just cannot get a good result with it. I can bring everything out, but it usually ends up extremely noisy, and then I have to deal with the noise. So I actually don't use that. The multi-scale adaptive stretch is a new one that's come out, and I haven't been very familiar with it. I'm just sort of having a look at that and learning it. I've seen it's been really good with one-shot color images and with stars, because it preserves and gives you the nice color of the stars, but I haven't used that so much. And I've actually taken the lazy route and using this thing called the Easy Stretch of the Easy Processing Suite. And this came out a while ago, and then I think the person who created it then stopped using it or developing it, and it kind of disappeared and fell by the wayside. But one of the members of the people of the Deep Sky Collective that I was imaging with the big projects, they took it over and brought it back to life again. It's still available. And it actually does a really nice job. So this is an image that I'm still collecting data on. We've got the Statue of Liberty Nebula here. We've got the Southern tadpoles. We've got the Scary Face Nebula. You can't really see the Scary Face in other areas. And there's a lot of nebulosity here, but there's a lot of very high background. It's very light and not a lot of contrast. And what I tend to do is, if you go to put this site in here into your resources and repositories and all that kind of stuff, and get it to load in, you'll actually end up with this easy processing suite. There are these various options you can use. I don't use any of them except for the easy soft stretch. And the thing I like about it is that this is what comes up on your menu. So you can, I've never found that zeroing in the white does a lot, and the aggressiveness doesn't seem to do a lot, but changing these expanding low and target medium, if you just slide these backwards and forwards, you can change the sort of contrast on these and how much dark the background is, how brighter these areas are. And this is what, when a stretch, just one quick stretch, click of a button, it goes from this to this. And this is actually, I find, quite manageable to work with. And then I might do a little adjustments with some curves, etc. So yeah, stretching, I do take the lazy route, and I do find the easy stretch works really, really well. Now, I might then do a bit of noise, getting rid of some noise. Another one from Russell Croman is Noise Exterminator, and the sort of new kid on the block is Prism Deep by Cyquan, and I think Frank with City Astro has been promoting this. And again, I feel that you've got to be a little cautious again with these and not to get too carried away, because although these people were saying that they 100% cannot create detail, I'm not 100% sure that's true. And I think that you can create some detail with Noise Exterminator that's actually out of the noise, particularly if you're a little bit too aggressive. So you do have to be a little bit careful with them. Now, this is what Prism, for how you buy Prism Deep. With Noise Exterminator, if you bought one version, you could use it for both Photoshop and PixInsight with the one payment. The one thing that was a bit frustrating about this was when this first came out, and I did purchase it because I thought I'll try it out, it was only available for Cyril and City Astro Suite, and then later on it became available for all these, and I'd rather have had the PixInsight version, and it means that I'd have to buy it again, which is a bit annoying. So I think there might be some noises that they might be trying to do more of a cross-platform thing instead, because I think there's a few people who are like, I'd like to have been able to use it in other in other programs rather than in either Cyril or SETI. I don't SETI Astro Suite. I don't use Cyril, but I use one thing in SETI Astro Suite, and so I have to, if I use this program, I have to move it into my image into that rather than leave it in PixInsight. So it's a little frustrating if I do it. And I won't go through, but these are the options. This is in SETI Astro Suite. These are the sort of options that you can use for doing the noise extermination with this, but I won't go through that because I'm still just learning it a bit myself. Now, these are a couple of images, the same image that I did where I did noise exterminator. I think these were not stretched. And then I used Prism Deep, similar sort of settings, similar kind of results. There might be a little bit more detail down here in Prism Deep than a noise exterminator here, but it's hard to get them exactly equivalent. But they both did a very nice job of denoising things, but I think you've got to be a little careful. So they say that you can use them both in linear state and in a stretch state. And I think you just got to be careful that if you have a lot of noise in the background and you do quite a lot of sort of noise extermination, because they also do some sharpening, both the programs. And here's an example. So it's the same image, but what I did was I had stretched it and I had a lot of noise here. And then I used the same settings with, this is with Prism Deep. And suddenly I got all this so-called detail in here, which I don't actually think is detail. I think it's just variation in the noise. There are little pale areas here where the stars were removed, and then we've got this noise. So I think you do have to be a little careful with these noise exterminating programs, that you're not too aggressive with the settings, because I actually think you can produce some data that I really don't think is there. And look, I'm not an expert, and somebody might be able to say no, that's not the case. And I know that Prism Deep say no, it can't. But that looks pretty nice, and that looks like a bit funny to me. So yeah, I try to use both of them. If I'm using any of them, use them on a sort of a lower setting and not get too carried away with the number of iterations. So this is when I sort of, once I've stretched everything and I've still got my stacks of my individual HA S2 and O3, I will actually save them as 16-bit TIFF files, and I'll throw them into Photoshop. And I find it easier to adjust the contrast, shadows, highlights, etc., using Photoshop, the camera raw filter, because it's also easier to use masks. You use masks in PixInsight, but they're a little restrictive, whereas in Photoshop, you can just use the brush tool and paint any areas you like. So this is actually the camera raw filter, which is just under here. There's filter in Photoshop, and you'll see a camera raw option. And up comes this menu. Sorry, it's my mouse again. And here you can just use some sliders just to adjust a little bit, the highlights, the contrast, the shadows. So different components of here, which I think are quite nice. If you've got some areas of highlights a bit bright, you can just drag the highlights back a bit, and it doesn't really affect a lot of these other areas necessarily of the image. If you want to, you can quickly put a mask, sort of just paint a mask over this area and just have it affect that area as well. There are color bits that you can do in the filters in this filter, but they're grayed out at the moment because it's a black and white image. So I'll do that and get it to a point where I quite like the lighter and the darker areas. And this obviously hasn't been done yet, but just bring down these highlights so I can see some more of the detail. And then I'll save it again and back into PixInsight. So save them again as TIFF files. Now, I often like to do a bit of local histogram equalization. Now, if you do a tutorial from Adam Block, he'll be able to tell you everything about what these little things can do. I'm more of that person who can drive a car but doesn't know how it works, but I know how to drive a car. So I can't explain to you about all these different, what these exactly all mean, but these are settings I found with the local histogram or the LHE, which tends to help with a little bit of contrast in your image and sometimes bring out a little bit, sort of show a little more detail because of that variation in contrast. I don't do a lot. If you have it ramped up to full amount, it will really wreck your image. So, have it quite low. And I've just brought the kernel radius up to here because I saw some examples. I think it does a bit more of the finer detail around here, the contrast on the small elements. So that's what I use. But you can experiment with that, drag this up and down, change the amount. Some images are better with up at 0.3. But yeah, definitely don't put it up here. Otherwise, you will end up with a very ugly looking image. The other thing is sometimes I'll do some HDR multi-scale transform, and that's really good for the really bright areas where things have washed out some of the detail. What I do is I usually want it to only affect the very bright areas, not the whole image. If you want it to affect the whole image, then you won't sort of click this lightness mask or to intensity. But if you click this, it will just do it to the sort of brighter areas. And I haven't noticed a big difference between whether you click to intensity or to lightness, but what it'll do is it'll just focus on those very bright areas of your image and help recover some of the detail that's lost in the brightness. The number of layers you can just vary around. Some images are good at 5, some at 6, some at 7. I usually just are somewhere between 5 and 7. I never change the iterations because it just gets too harsh. You can change the intensity here, and I don't really touch any of these things like the de-ringing, etc. And just an example, this is the Statue of Liberty Nebula. So this is no HDR. So here's Lady Liberty here with her arm outstretched. And I don't know, to me, this always looks like the head of a cow rather than the plinth with the two eyes, the sort of ear out here and the sort of flatter head across and a couple of nostrils. And then the cow's over here. But in here, there is some detail. And so if you do HDR, suddenly you can see some more. It's just sort of changed the contrast a bit, and some of this nebula detail has come out and it's no longer washed out. And the other thing, sorry, mouse. The other thing is that this area over here, which is quite bright, you can now see a bit more variation and I think a bit more detail. So I like using this, but just where areas are quite bright, not to the whole image. You can see there's not much change up here and here because it's really done it to the brighter areas. Then I'll go and combine my filters using the LRGB combination tool with just luminance unticked, and usually tick the chrominance noise reduction, and I'll get myself something like this. This usually it's very green, and I've actually done sort of some degreening with the SCNR tool. I don't actually do 100%. I just sort of bring it down a little bit. I like to leave a little bit of green in there just because when I'm actually adjusting the colors in Photoshop, it gives me another little hue that I can play around with that often will give you a little bit more variation in color. And it also means the transition from some colors to other colors can be a bit smoother. So I find that keeping that a little bit of green in there is quite useful. And then I just, in PixInsight, I'll just, adjust the contrast a bit with curves, etc. And then I'll actually save it again and I'm back into Photoshop. So this is just an example that I did recently of what's called RCW19. It's got no other fancy name. And when you initially combine them in PixInsight and you do some SCNR with the green not completely removed, it's probably not hard to see on the screen, but there is sort of a little hint of it through here. You end up with this image that's quite sort of yellowy here, some bright yellow, and then you've got this sort of cyan kind of color here. But we want to get this a little bit more rich in color. So in Photoshop, first of all, in PixInsight, you can use the color mask script if you want to, and I used to use that quite a lot. The only thing is that you can highlight areas here and you can use the tool to select areas, then you can actually adjust these sliders here, which will narrow up the areas of the color that you want to isolate in your image. And then you do some blurring of layers, click OK, and you'll end up with a mask. But they do have still, when you blur it quite a lot, there's still sort of well-defined edges, which can make your image start to look like you're going suddenly from one color to another. But, you take your time with it, it would be fine. But I've now used Photoshop because I just find it easier to do the transitions and the masks. So we're back into here where I've put it in the main image and just duplicated the layer. gone up to filter into the camera raw filter again. And this time, because it's a color image, I've got all these options for adjusting the color. So again, if you want to, you can do some changes to the highlights and the contrasts and bring the background darker a little bit if you want to. And then you can increase the temperature here a little bit, then make it whole thing a bit warmer. And you can change the tint a little bit. I don't actually change the vibrance at all. You can adjust the saturation a little bit, but it's usually something I do at the very end, particularly if I've overdone it or underdone it. And then further down here, which is off the screen because I can't show it all, there is another selection of tools here called the color mixer. And now you can get into your individual colors and you can change the hue, you can change the saturation, you can change the luminance, clicking on these and just move these sliders. And what I actually do is I'll often use a mask and sort of, so if I would just want to do this area, just with the brush tool, make this a mask over here and sort of blur, sort of feather it a bit so it's just a bit smoother out to the edges. And then I can start adjusting the colors up in certain areas and just make small adjustments, just change it a little bit. And then save that and then come back into here and now look at the other areas that you want to change, make small adjustments again. Rather than making big adjustments, I think that if you make small adjustments to different areas, each time you come in, you can just define the colors a little bit different from each other. So although that looks like a yellow and that looks like a yellow, with smaller changes, you can actually start defining this differently to this area here. And the same here. And with there's a hint of green in there, you can actually adjust the greens a little bit and just get a nicer transition, particularly if you're turning this more to an orangey or red color. The transition going through to this cyan color can be nice and smooth and not very abrupt and harsh. So I suggest just doing little changes, saving it, and then you can do this thing called Alt Control Shift E, where it'll just then make another version of all the changes on top, and you can go back in and just make smaller changes and just keep layering up like that. And then the other really useful tool, which I learned more recently from one of the guys in the Deep Sky Collective, and that is this selective color tool. Now down here in Photoshop, so you've got your image in here, and if you click on this, so I highlighted it here, but when you click on this little symbol here, you'll get all these options come up. And again, a lot of these things you can see in the camera raw filter and exposure curves, levels, brightness, etc. But this selective color tool, if you click on that, this will pop up. And again, you've got colors and you've got sliders where you can start adjusting and changing the tones and hues and that of these individual parts of your image. And it's actually quite powerful in what it can do. So if you click on this bit here, these options come down. You can change the yellows, the greens, the cyans, and then you choose a red, and then just start playing around and sliding these left and right and seeing what it's doing to your image and seeing if that's what you like. And then you save it, and then you can then click this and then say, now I'm going to do the blues, and you can change the blues independently of the reds, etc. It won't be changing those in the rest of the image. And then you can save all that and then save the whole lot together as one image. And then you can go back in here and start making small adjustments again and changing these things so that you end up with the colors you like. So this works really well. A lot of the images you'll see on AstroBin, they'll often have, their reds will have a bit of a slight, nice, rich magenta tone, and that's because they've just slid the red this way a little bit into the magenta, just a little bit, not till it turns purple, but just to give it a slightly magenta look to the red, and that can actually look quite nice. But these are two tools that I use a lot for, or pretty much for doing all my color adjustments. And so over time, you can change something from this to this. I think by having a little bit of green, it just sort of helps. You can't see the green in here, but it just helped me make the transition from this more sort of orangey red color through to the more bluey from the cyan, sort of the blue color. And then having this area a bit more defined now means that, you can see it becomes more like a detail here with the dark nebulosity over the top here. So that's primarily the two tools that I use for adjusting the colors. You can go back into PixInsight and you can do changes in saturation and use some of the tools in there, but most of the color work that I do are using the Camera Raw and the selective color tools in Photoshop. And I know some others who use the Photoshop tools primarily as well and seem to get some quite good results. And that's just the final image that I did of this one, bringing the stars back in. And yeah, I was quite happy. It's not a very not commonly imaged this one, so there's not a lot of images of this. But yeah, that was the final result that I had, which is sort of quite different to your initial combination. Now, the other thing that I do, I've still got a little bit of time, is I'll often produce multiple versions, because sometimes I find that I'll do a version and it's like, I like some parts of it and I don't like other parts of it. I'll put it aside, I'll come back a few days later and have another go, and then that version will have some bits that I like that are different to the bits of the other one that I don't like. And what you can actually do is you can put them into Photoshop and you can actually blend them either with masks, or you can use some of their other blending tools like the screen blending, like for bringing the stars back in, or lighten. There's all sorts of different ways of blending in your images. An example I did of this recently, I was doing Carina, and it was SHO, and I sort of got to this point and I was kind of a bit disappointed. It looked a little bit flat and uninteresting, particularly in the middle. I did make some adjustments later to make this a bit more deep red, but even when I was adjusting the colors, it just was disappointing. And at the same time, I had taken RGB frames for my stars, and Carina's quite bright. And so when you actually pick up quite a bit of nebulosity in the RGB. So I actually, when I stacked up the RGB frames for just the stars, I then took the stars out and I had a look, and I was like, well, I've got this, and I did a little bit of processing on this bit. And I thought, I wonder what it would look like if I blended it in with my SHO version in Photoshop. So this is in Photoshop here before I added it in. And there are changes out here. You'll see the stars come back in the next version, and you'll see this is a deeper red, but just sort of look to these middle areas, this middle area here, that when I flick across to there, by adding in and just blending in, I think it was the lighten part that I used. There's a lighten option, and that was another one of the many blending tools in Photoshop. And that just brought in a lot more interest, I thought, here. So from that, which looked a little bit to me disappointing and flat, to that which had a lot more variation and a bit more of a 3D look, I thought. And yeah, so I think it's really good. I blend images quite a lot. And I think that if you are struggling with an image that you're finding that some parts of it, or one area of the image is really good, but another area is not very good, and then you reprocess it, and I've got this bit good, but this bit's not very good. Take them into Photoshop and actually do a blend of them with a final version and get the best of all the worlds, and end up with your final because it's not we're blending things anyway. We're doing all sorts of things like this. We're taking our mono images, we're adding artificial color effectively when we're doing mono imaging, and we're blending them together. We're processing the different stacks independently, and we're blending them. So, I don't see that there's anything wrong with doing blending, and I see plenty of well-known astrophotographers doing exactly the same sort of thing. Now, look, was going to do a thing about processing of the stars, but are we sort of out of time now? Are we time up sort of thing?
I think you could run through this bit quickly. Yeah, I think.
Okay, I'll go through quickly because a lot of the tools are actually very similar to what I've been talking about anyway. I'll often take images, like for RGB stars, but not all the time. So if I've just done narrowband, I'll do a channel combination before it's stretched and put that aside just to take the stars out with Star Exterminator. And then I keep those aside. And I actually use SETI Astro Suite Star Stretch tool, which is a plugin that you can have in PixInsight. I just like the way it produces the stars, and I like the way you can get some easy manipulation of how prominent they are, and also the color. And so this is it here. And you open up, you can show a preview, you can tell it to remove the green if you like, and then you can, I usually leave the color boost at 1. It seems to give a nice amount of color. And then depending on how prominent you want your stars to be, some images, really get enhanced by beautiful bright stars all over the place, but other ones it can distract from the nebula. So you can just experiment. I do a trial of a few versions. Usually I don't go below 3.5, otherwise the stars start to disappear too much, but you just practice with a few versions, put them into your image and go, oh yeah, is this too much? Is this overrunning the nebulosity or whatever? But it just seems to do a really nice way of producing very nice stars, I think, that look good and have nice color. There will be sometimes some magenta, so under script, utilities, correct magenta stars, I'll just throw that out, and it'll remove the magenta. And I'll also then run the SCNR to remove any green that might be left over, although this you will usually do it. So this is the correct magenta stars tool over here, and that's just the SCNR for removing the green. And then I'll often save it as a TIFF file, and I'll take it into Photoshop again, and I'll actually go through, because sometimes with narrowband images, your stars can be a little bit red and orange. And if you're trying to get that more sort of nice yellowy golden color that you see in a lot of images, I take it into Photoshop and just adjust the oranges a little bit, just to get them a little bit more sort of golden colored. I'm not the best person at doing stars. Some people do them really well. You look on Astrobin and you see some images and they're like amazing stars that just jump out at you and really enhance the image. I'm still trying to get better at stars, but I think the way you want your stars in the final version is that they kind of look like spheres, so they're a bit brighter in the center and just sort of a bit paler off to the corners, so they look nice and round, and not like sort of paint splats, which can be what they are if they're a little bit too harshly done. So that's why I like SETI Astro Suite Star Stretch. I think it just stretches them quite nicely. And then once I've adjusted the colors, again, I can do it with a selective colors tool. With that, won't stay any more time on that. And then the next thing I'll do is a little bit sort of, you don't really have to do this, but I'll go and I'll look at all the stars, and you'll see some of the stars with, they'll have this sort of chromatic aberration kind of thing. You'll have a bit of orange on one side, a bit of blue on the other. And you'll have plenty of stars will be nice and blue, plenty of stars will be orange and yellow, whatever, but you'll get these ones that are like that. What I do is I just use a mask, and I click a mask and I go through the stars on high power, and any that I think have that chromatic aberration, I will click on that, feather the mask a little bit here with a bit of feathering, and then I go down to, sorry, it's slightly off the screen, but this color noise reduction, and I just bring the slider across, and basically it sort of reduces the orange and the blue away until you're left with mostly a white star, which is fine, because I think you've got plenty of colored stars and you've got some white stars, and I think it just removes that those stars that have got that combination of color, which are not that pleasant in the end. And then re-screen the stars back in either Photoshop or in PixInsight. You can do either. And this is just doing it in Photoshop. So this is an image that I did. The Southern Beehive cluster was here, but obviously it's gone out with the stars. This is the Toby Jug Nebula, and this was some HA in the background and some dust. And then I just brought the stars in here, and you change we'll come up to it, I think, next. This is when you put your star layer on top. If it's set on normal, all you're going to see are the stars, but you click on this, there'll be an option for screen. And so you go from normal and you click on screen, and it just nicely puts the stars in there and does a nice job of it. Now you can see the Southern Beehive cluster here. And of course, there are tools that do exactly the same thing in PixInsight, so you can do it in either. And that's sort of the approach I'm using for doing my stars. But, I still think it's a work in progress. I think there are people who do far better job at doing stars than I do. Oh, this is just what you can do in PixInsight. This is a script that you can use. So that's the name of your starless image. That's the name of your stars image. And you just click the square and it'll actually chuck your stars back in. Does a really nice job of rescreening them back in. And look, just to finish, I just thought I'd show you just a few images of objects of the Southern Hemisphere target. So this is from the Large Magnetic Cloud. You saw a smaller version of it earlier, the Tarantula Nebula here. So there's a ton of stuff that you can image in the Large Magnetic Cloud. This is not the whole of it. And then you can spend some time with a longer focal length telescope and just home in on some areas. So I got the Meade and I homed in on what's called the cosmic reef that Hubble made sort of famous of this image, and they thought it looked like the undersea world, and it's got some nice colors. And this is the nice thing about the LMC, is that you can get your longer focal length telescope and really, image areas quite in high detail, and similar to what we're imaging in our own galaxy, which I think is quite amazing. And of course, you saw the Carina Nebula one. This is the running chicken. Now, nobody's ever successfully told me where the running chicken actually is, where you can see it. I don't think there's people done all sorts of things trying to tell you where it is. Nobody has convincingly told me where it is, and nobody can agree on where it is. I've realized that actually a lot of these things have got their names from people looking at them visually, and they're only seeing parts of it. An example would be the Banana Nebula. If we image it, it looks like a complete sphere of detail. But if you look at old images, back, say, 15 years ago, and it would be similar to what people were seeing. You just saw the bright areas of a sort of a crescent, looked like a banana. And I think that's where these names come from. But nobody has convincingly told me where the running chicken is here. I actually took an image of this earlier, a previous one, a couple of years earlier, and I actually did it upside down for a change. And I had it in my up on the screen, and my wife came in and went, "Oh, that's Crumb from Are Real Monsters," which is a cartoon that my son watches. And I really do think that this should be changed to Crumb from Are Real Monsters Nebula. As admittedly, he's got a third eye over here, but it did seem to fit quite nicely there. So some of the names on some objects are quite hard to work out where the hell they come from. This is just one I did looking into Carina. This is the Keyhole Nebula. And we've got this bit here, which is differently named, either the Defiant Finger or God's Middle Finger, some people call it. We've got the Mystic Mountain up here. And my main reason for imaging this was to try and get the Homunculus Nebula that's surrounding Eta Carina. So Eta Carina is throwing off its shell here. So this was to get this, I had to actually deal with this separately. The HA, I think, were 1 second exposures, and the RGB on here were 0.1 second exposures because it's so bright. And in AstroBin, you can see this image, and it shows more detail here of the homunculus. But that was my main task, was to try and get this nebula, which is just the outer shell of the Eta Carina, which is actually a dual star system. So that was quite a challenge. This is another one. This is the OED Nebula with the something or other bubble, I can't remember, imaged by some of the high-powered people in Chile that you can see on AstroBin. I think that it only sort of came to light in 2023. So, and it's been just sort of sitting there in plain sight right next to the Pencil Nebula and the Vela supernova remnants. So this is quite an unusual and quite a cool looking target, and some nice HA in the background. And this is the Statue of Liberty Nebula, which is what I've just recently done. And again, doing that processing that I showed you, it went from here with some of the green removed. To be honest, some people might say, hey, that's really nice, just leave it as that, throw the stars back in and you're done. People may prefer that to this, might think this is a little bit too harsh, but this is where I processed this in Photoshop through those tools to get an image of this. And I really wanted to show all the areas of detail here in the darker areas. So yeah, those are the tools that I use for processing my images. So I hope that's been useful. Bit quick, sorry, and a bit of a run through. Sorry, I've gone a bit over time too.
No, that's fine, Logan. That's really good. I've got to say, your images are absolutely spectacular, and you pick up quite a few images a day, don't you, from Astrobin, I think.
Yes, yeah, that's
well deserved.
a great place to work out where you get your targets from too, because go and see what other people are imaging, and also it doesn't hurt to have a look if you're processing your image and just have a quick look and go, now this person got image of the day, or this person got a top pick. Well, how did theirs look? What can I do to sort of get somewhere near there? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, because it really should be for yourself to make a pleasing image for yourself. But yeah, it's a great resource for picking out, finding targets you had no idea existed.
I do exactly the same. So, have we got any questions from anyone? Questions? Yeah? No?
I've got a question.
Steve's got a question.
Yeah, quick question. It's about calibrating your monitor. I find often when I do an image, I'll look on another screen or on my phone, it looks completely different. Do you do anything about calibrating your monitor?
Yeah, so I was doing imaging I had a couple of monitors actually, and they were just monitors I bought for doing, your usual stuff on the computer and playing games and stuff like that. And I didn't really think about the color or the calibration, etc. And I got comments from the Deep Sky Collective group going, it was actually another group that I was with, but it was some of the same members, and we would sort of process versions, and they went, your stuff's really got really dark background. And I'm like, no. And it wasn't until after a while I realized it was my monitor. And my monitor, so the one that I've got over here on my left, is my cheaper monitor. And actually, it's got really quite harsh differences between light and dark, and the colors, it's got quite a purple hue to it too, as well. So, of course, I was changing things to try and get rid of what I thought was a purple hue, but actually I was making my images worse. I did have this other monitor, which is over to my right, which is a bit better, but it still wasn't that flash. So I actually went and bought myself a monitor here, which it was to do with I can't remember exactly, but there's stuff in the background. There's Adobe something or other. You have to look at the specs through the screens, but they're more calibrated to actually doing images and photography. And so as soon as I bought this monitor, I actually just put it on this monitor to process it. I do move it to the other monitors to have a look and see what it looks like, because I know other people will be looking at it on different monitors. And I do find that if I can get it right on this monitor, it doesn't look horrendous on the left one, and it looks semi-okay on the right one. But yeah, there's a huge difference between where you look at it on your phone. That looks different. Or if I take it, like I'll do one and I'll just annoy my family and show it on the TV. And TVs are not a good way of giving you a good representation, because they have quite massive contrast, and things can look quite harsh on there. But sometimes it's nice to see it on a big screen, the big overview. But your monitor is quite important, because you can be fooled into doing your colors a certain way, and then everybody else looks at it and go, oh, that's really purple, or that's really green, or whatever. So yeah, it is important, I think.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
I've got a question.
Oh.
Is there a major target in the Southern Hemisphere you've still got to have a go at?
I still plan to have a go at, did you say?
A major target that you want to photograph in this?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can come back. You keep coming back to them. That's the thing. There's obviously sort of the famous ones like, Carina and the Running Chicken, and things like that, and also the Statue of Liberty, which I always thought really should be a Northern Hemisphere target, given where the Statue of Liberty is. But that's okay. We've got it down here, so I'm happy about that. But a lot of these things I've imaged, and then as you progress with your astrophotography, you think, I can do better. And you go back and you do it again, a couple of years later. And I think you can keep coming back to them. Or the other thing is you can come back to parts of them. So like I did Carina, and I've done Carina more than once. And then I thought, well, actually, I now want to see if I can do the Homunculus Nebula or whatever. So you can keep coming back to them with your different telescopes, I think. There's still plenty of targets in the Southern Hemisphere. I've kind of got a little bit into doing some of the very dim targets like the SNRs, which are actually hard to image. Unfortunately, having a climate like ours is not ideal because a lot of those require a lot of hours and it can take a long time. It can actually take up your whole time. So some things I managed to get images of, but it's taken me 7 months to collect the data because you need nearly 100 hours to actually show up this very faint supernova remnant. And I think there's quite a few of them still around which I haven't done yet, and I'm still collecting data on. And there are some targets which I have started doing, but I've run out of time because they've started to move below the horizon because we just haven't had the clear night. So there's still plenty to image here in the Southern Hemisphere. And as I said, have your other telescope, a long focal length or a whatever, and just image on a small area of it and really bring out the detail in that. Like, for example, in the Large Magellanic Cloud, do it in a wide field, like the whole thing, and then do it with a telescope that can get maybe the tarantula in its nearby areas. And then if you've got a Meade, zoom in on small areas. So yeah, you can still keep going for years, I think, on these things.
Thank you.
So I haven't got a question because my question was stolen. But on another sort of note, you use many of the tools that I use, and your processing techniques are very similar to mine. I use the same. I use Camera Raw, the same tools in PixInsight. Have you used more of the SETI suite tools? Because I think in SETI's new statistical stretch, he's improved it a lot. So you can actually do HDR in there as well.
Okay, I'll have a look back at that because I've looked at. I mean, what Frank's done is quite amazing, and that he's made this available to everybody, basically for free. And people can sit there and just do all their processing in there without having to fork out for Photoshop and PixInsight, and create an image that they really like. And I think it's amazing what he's done. I haven't used many. As I said, I used the Star Stretch tool. I've just started using that noise thing, and that's a plugin. That's actually not his program, but is a plugin in his one. I did use the statistical stretch. I tried it out, and I kept finding it was a little bit harsh, and I wasn't really getting the contrast, and everything came out extremely bright. And so I hadn't used it, and I just sort of gravitated back to my lazy easy stretch. But if you say it's improved quite significantly, I'll have a look at it again because I really like his star stretch, and I use that all the time for my stars. So, if he does have, if the statistical stretch, bit of a mouthful that one, can be used, and if he's made it available as a plugin in PixInsight, and that works really well, I'll go back and have a look at it. So thank you for letting me know about that because, I hadn't used it. I tried it, but I'll give it another look.
Okay, thank you very much. Is any questions? Anyone? Any more? No?
Only one I'd like to ask. If you went further up towards Paia or that sort of area, would the light pollution be better for you?
Yeah, so that's the whole point about being north and at the batch up north, and there's not major cities up there. I mean, there's going up to there are lots of areas because of Auckland, the way New Zealand is, that is not that heavily populated, and there's lots of countryside. That there are plenty of areas where people live where they have really dark skies, and of course down in Mackenzie country, they're basically into Bortle 1, and I've been down there. I didn't take a main telescope, but I took I did Milky Way shots there, and down there it's just insane when you look up at the Milky Way. Instead of being a little thin strip of stars through the middle, it's this really wide thing, and you can virtually almost, you think you can see the dust, with your eyes. It's just incredible. Up where I am up north at Langs Beach, the amount of time. So to give you an example, I was imaging a target here. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And I'd done 24 hours of imaging of the HA faint target. I can't remember which one it was. And then I went up north, and with the telescope, I did 4 hours. and I had more detail in the 4 hours up north than I did in the 24 hours here in Auckland. And when I tried to combine them, the 24 hours down here in Auckland actually hurt the data in the stack of the 4 hours. So I chucked away that 24 hours, which was a lot of hours to throw away. But I threw it away and I just used the stuff up north. So if you can get into dark skies, it can make a huge difference. First of all, to the detail you can get on faint targets, great for dark nebulae, and but also your imaging time, you can just reduce it dramatically. And I think personally myself, 1 hour up north is worth about 4 to 6 hours down here, probably 4 hours worth or something. Makes a big difference.
Thank you.
Okay, Logan.
But if you've got light pollution, you just got to deal with it though. There's nothing you can do about it.
Well, Logan, thank you very much. It's been very interesting. We loved your images in your presentation, and so thank you very much. And,